So, imagine you have to write one single rule book for over a billion people. It sounds kind of impossible, right? Well, that's exactly what India did, and in the process, created one of the most incredible documents on Earth, its constitution. And this isn't some dusty old legal text. Think of it more like the operating system for the world's biggest democracy. But that immediately brings up a huge question. I mean, seriously, how can over a billion people who speak hundreds of different languages, practice all kinds of religions, and have these incredibly diverse cultures, how can they all agree on one set of rules for living together?
You know what? Let's bring it closer to home. Just picture everyone in your city or even your neighborhood. You've got different beliefs, different tastes in music, different ideas of what's fair. How would you all agree on the most basic rules? Well, that's the exact problem the Indian Constitution had to solve, just on a scale that is almost impossible to wrap your head around.
Okay, so how do you even begin to solve a problem that big? You start by creating a single shared rulebook, one that applies to absolutely everyone, from the prime minister in New Delhi to a farmer in the most remote village.
At its core, a constitution is basically the DNA of a country. It lays out all the fundamental principles for how the state is supposed to be governed. It's the source code that says what the government can do, what it can't do, and maybe most importantly, what fundamental rights belong to you, the citizen. So, what are these big promises baked into this rulebook? Well, they're called the fundamental rights, and they are without a doubt the absolute heart and soul of the Constitution. And listen, these are not just some vague, abstract ideas. The Constitution gets very specific about the injustices it protects you from. It says flat out, you cannot be denied entry to a shop or a public park because of your caste. It says you can't be forced into labor. And, critically, it says the government can't just throw someone in jail without a lawful reason. These rights are meant to be a shield for every single citizen. Dr. Ambedkar, who is the chief architect of the Constitution, said one particular right was the heart and soul of the whole thing, the right to constitutional remedies. Why? Because this is the master key. It means that if any of your other rights are violated, you can go straight to the courts to get them enforced. It's the one right that makes all the other rights real.
All right, so we've got these fundamental rights, which is great. But how does the whole system of power actually work? Well, the Constitution also lays out the rules for the great game of politics, starting with something really basic, how we choose our leaders. Now, here's a quick question for you. In an election, you'd probably assume that the party that gets the most votes from the people ends up with the most power, right? I mean, that just seems logical. But is that really how it works? Let's take a look at the 1984 general election. Check out the Congress Party. They got 48% of the total votes, so less than half. Now, slide your eyes over to the seats column. They won an unbelievable 415 seats. Now, look at the BJP. They got a pretty decent 7.4% of the vote, which translated to just 2 seats. Wait, what? How is that even possible? Yeah, you're seeing that right. Less than half of the votes resulted in more than 80% of the power. And this isn't some kind of mistake or a bug in the system. It's actually a feature. It's all about how the rules of the game are written. The reason for this is a system called first past the post. Here's how it works. The whole country is broken up into 543 little local races, or constituencies. And in each one of those races, it's winner take all. Even if you win by just a single vote, you get the seat, and every other vote that was cast for other candidates in that area, well, it effectively vanishes. That's how a party can pile up seats without actually winning a majority of the nationwide vote. So, if the election rules can create such a massive concentration of power, what's to stop a government from becoming too powerful? Well, don't worry. The Constitution has a built-in safety mechanism for exactly that. The power is deliberately split 3 ways. First, you have the legislature, which is the parliament, and their job is to make the laws. Then you have the executive, that's the government, and their job is to enforce those laws. And finally, you have the judiciary, the courts, who act like an impartial referee, making sure everyone is playing by the constitutional rules. Each one can check the power of the other two, creating a balance. And that judicial referee has this amazing and powerful tool called a public interest litigation, or PIL. Basically, it means you don't have to be the one who was directly wronged to go to court. If you see an injustice happening to people who can't fight for themselves, like prisoners or the very poor, you can actually file a case on their behalf. Here's a perfect real-life example. Back in the late 70s, journalists discovered that thousands of prisoners in Bihar were stuck in jail for years, sometimes even longer than the maximum sentence for the crime they were accused of, all without ever getting a trial. An advocate filed a PIL, the Supreme Court took up the case, and it led to the release of over 40,000 of these prisoners. That is the incredible power of the PIL.
This all leads us to our final and maybe the most important point. A rulebook for 1 billion people that was written over 70 years ago, how can it possibly account for every new challenge? Is it just stuck in the past? The answer is a definite no.
See, this rulebook was actually designed to be updated. The Indian Constitution has been changed or amended more than 100 times. That flexibility is what allows it to evolve and adapt to new social values and new problems, making it a truly living document that grows right along with the nation.
And a lot of this evolution comes from some pretty intense debates. The Constitution itself sets up this fascinating tension. On one side, you've got legally enforceable fundamental rights for individuals. But on the other, you have something called directive principles, which are more like guidelines or goals for the government, like trying to reduce inequality. For decades, there was this huge clash between an individual's right to property and the government's goal of land reform for the poor. It's this constant balancing act between individual liberty and the collective good that keeps the Constitution alive. So when you get right down to it, the Indian Constitution is so much more than a document. It's a continuous, often loud, and always important national conversation about rights, about power, and about justice. And that leaves us with one last big thought. If this really is a living rulebook, who gets to write the next chapter?